Today, Israel strikes Iran's nuclear sites and Tehran retaliates with more than 100 drones. India and Boeing search for answers after the world's deadliest air crash in a decade.
And Kilmar Abrego Garcia is back from El Salvador's notorious prison and set to appear in a U.S. court. It's Friday, June 13th. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes, every weekday. I'm Christopher Waljasper in Chicago.
And I'm Tara Oakes in Liverpool. Israel has launched wide-scale strikes against Iran, saying it's the start of a prolonged operation to prevent Tehran from building an atomic weapon. Iran has launched about 100 drones towards Israeli territory in retaliation, Israel says. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said in a statement that Israel had unleashed its wicked and bloody hand in a crime against Iran and that it would receive a bitter fate for itself. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat.
Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards Corps says its top commander, Hossein Salami, was killed. Witnesses have reported explosions, including at the country's main uranium enrichment facility. The United States says it had no part in the operation. Edmund Blair is our Middle East editor. So Ed, what happens now?
The big question now is, how does Iran retaliate? But alongside that, there's the question is, how can it retaliate? If we had asked this question 18 months, 2 years ago, we would have talked about its proxies or allies in the region. Now, many of these allies, proxies, have faced heavy damage in the war that we've seen as the conflict, as the Gaza war has expanded well beyond Gaza and around the region. Hezbollah is a shadow of itself in terms of the kind of weaponry it can deploy or wants to deploy. Hamas has been hammered in on the ground in Gaza. So Iran's room for maneuver is severely constrained.
And the US has sought to distance itself from the Israeli strikes. Where do they leave the US?
I think the big questions that many people are asking is, while US does distance itself from these strikes, how involved was it? How much did it know? It says it was forewarned. To what extent was there coordination? It says it did not coordinate. It says it was not involved. And yet we know that Israel is one of the closest allies of the United States in the region. So the idea that it was not involved at all may cause some to raise questions.
Global stock markets dived and oil prices surged on news of the Israeli strike. Carmel Crimmins has more.
The escalation of hostilities in the Middle East adds a fresh layer of uncertainty for financial markets, at a time when investors are already trying to get their heads around President Trump's trade policies. The Middle East is obviously a major oil-producing region, so this attack raises concerns about supply. Crude oil prices jumped as much as 14% at one point on Friday. That's the highest intraday move since Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2022. And stocks are down globally. With the geopolitical tension so high, gold is the winner. It's close to record highs previously hit in April.
It's the world's worst air disaster in a decade. Rescuers are still searching for missing people after an Air India plane crash killed more than 240. Relatives have been asked to give DNA samples to help identify victims. Waiting at the hospital, Vishnal Manaria said his uncle was on board the plane. Only one passenger survived, Ramesh Viswash Kumar, who police say was sitting in seat 11A near an emergency exit and managed to jump out.
This is the first fatal accident involving a Boeing 787. Global aerospace and defense editor Joe Brock is here to lay out how the crash might be a test for Boeing's new CEO.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that this was the first fatal incident involving a 787 Dreamliner, which has been a very safe, reliable aircraft. And it's far too early for us to know what caused the crash. And often it's multiple causes, both technological and human, that lead to these sorts of disasters. So it's very early in the investigation stage. What I think is important for Boeing right now is public perception because of the history of what's happened to Boeing in recent years. Last year, they had the door blowout on the MAX as it was in flight. That's still in people's memories. So that public perception may put the CEO, Kelly Ortberg, on the back foot and back into crisis management mode, which is exactly where he doesn't want to be because he's just come out of that situation and trying to stabilize the company.
A US appeals court has allowed President Donald Trump to keep National Guard troops in Los Angeles. That decision, for now, pausing a lower court ruling that had blocked the deployment.
The ruling came hours after California Senator Alex Padilla was shoved out of a press conference held by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem.
The fact of the matter is, a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your.
I also want to talk about specifically.
The California Democrat was forced to the ground and handcuffed by security after attempting to ask a question of the Homeland Secretary, who pledged to, quote, liberate Los Angeles from the protests over President Trump's immigration crackdown. In a statement, DHS said U.S. Secret Service agents believed Padilla was an attacker who did not comply with orders to back away. Noem later met with Padilla and said the two agreed to talk further. A new Reuters Ipsos poll found that only 35% of respondents say they approve of Trump's response to the protests in Los Angeles.
President Trump says he's planning to issue an immigration order to protect migrant farm and hotel workers amid his immigration crackdown.
Our farmers are being hurt badly by, they have very good workers. They've worked for them for 20 years. They're not citizens, but they've turned out to be, great.
Nearly 1 million farm workers and many dairy and meatpacking workers lack legal status, according to the Departments of Labor and Agriculture. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man wrongly deported to El Salvador before being returned to the US on migrant smuggling charges, is seeking sanctions against the Trump administration for allegedly stonewalling an inquiry into efforts to secure his return.
His case is representative of the Trump administration's hardline push to deport undocumented migrants, which set off protests across the U.S. Abrego Garcia was returned to the U.S. on migrant smuggling charges and will appear in a Nashville court later today. Our legal reporter, Luke Cohen, is in Nashville for the arraignment.
I think this case is very symbolic. I think this was maybe the most blatant example we have so far, according to Trump's critics, of a case in which someone was deported without due process. Trump has obviously ran on a platform of stepping up deportations, cracking down on illegal immigration. The question has always been, to what extent is he able to do that without running afoul of civil liberties and allowing everyone due process, the rights that are afforded to them under the law? It could take years to reach trial. So, by the time Abrego Garcia is found guilty or innocent of these criminal charges, who knows what the immigration picture is going to look like in the country. The other case over whether the Trump administration is in compliance with the judge's order to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return could potentially reach some sort of resolution sooner. And I think certainly if officials are held in contempt or a judge finds that officials violated her order, that could have implications for whether officials are willing to go along with implementing Trump's policies if it means they could be held personally responsible. I think that's a little further down the line, but it's potentially a test of how loyal the staffers entrusted with implementing Trump's policies will be if there are some sort of, personal legal consequences for them.
And for today's recommended read, A Weekend Listen. Check this feed tomorrow for an in-depth look into how drones are reshaping modern warfare and what it means for the future of conflicts.
For more on any of the stories from today, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. Don't forget to follow us on your favourite podcast player, and we'll be back on Monday with our daily headline show.